Ladies and gentlemen, dear audience, I'm going to talk about our novel method for desalting seawater. The method has been developed by the group of electronic and magnetic materials at the National Technical University of Athens. Why desalination plays such a momentous role in the 21st century? Because almost 1.2 billion people are suffering from the lack of potable water. And from the beginning of the 20th century, more than 11 million people died due to drought. Around 80 to 90% of all diseases and 30% of all deaths can be connected to bad water quality. The dark prognosis says that in the next 2 decades, people will require 40% more water. And the fact is that 97% of the water amount on Earth is salty and the rest is fresh water. And less than 1% from this 3% is within human reach. Let's see how the water cycle works in nature. The rainwater falls to the ground and eventually goes to the sea, moving over and through the earth, dissolving minerals and other materials along the way, becoming increasingly salty. As water evaporates through the sun's energy, it leaves the salt behind, and the resulting water vapor forms clouds that produce rain, thus continuing the water cycle. Based on the knowledge of the water cycle, people have been desalting water for centuries. One of the first mentioned was by Aristotle, who wrote of distillation of seawater 320 before Christ. Different techniques were used during the ages, and Rome's Pliny the Elder described a seawater distillation with condensation on fleece 70 after Christ. And Greece, Alexander of Aphrodisias described a seawater distillation with condensation on sponges 130 years later. A French explorer, Jean de Lery, reported a successful distillation during his voyage to Brazil in 1565, and James Cook desalinated water during his circumnavigations around the world. Through the middle of the 20th century, the most commonly used methods involved evaporation and distillation. Development of desalination took a major step forward during the Second World War, when the military establishment operating desalinating units in arid areas, because they needed to supply their troops by potable water. In the post-war years, however, scientists began to studying osmotic processes to desalinate water, and the first reported use of terms, reverse osmosis, appeared in an annual report in 1955 of the US Department of Interior's Office of Saline Water Commission. By the late 60s, commercial desalinating units producing up to 8,000 cubic meters per day began to be installed in various parts of the world. These commercial units used thermal processes. Development were continued, and in the 70s, commercial membrane technologies such reverse osmosis and electrodialysis began to be used more extensively. And since the electrodialysis could be desalinate water more economically than distillation, more interest was focused to produce water by desalination. In the 80s, desalination technology became a fully commercial enterprise, and in the 90s, the use of desalination technologies for municipal water supplies was commonplace. So two processes are mainly the membrane and the thermal technologies. Let's take a look at major desalination methods. Those can be distinguished in 4 main at four main principles. The first is the freezing desalination, the second is the ion exchange, the third group is based on thermal process and distillation, the fourth group based on membrane technologies. Three main methods belong to the distillation. It's the multi-stage flash distillation, the vapor compression, and the multiple effect distillation. And five techniques belongs to membrane processes: the reverse osmosis, the membrane distillation, nanofiltration, electrodiuresis reversal, and the forward osmosis. Now a little bit more detailed about the widely used methods. Reverse osmosis is a membrane technique, and osmosis is a natural process when two fluids are in different concentration, and they are separated by a semi-permeable membrane, and the fluid has a tendency to move from low concentration to high concentration region for chemical potential equilibrium. Formally, the reverse osmosis is a process for forcing the fluid to go to a high solute concentration region through a membrane to a low solute concentration region by applying pressure what exceeds the osmotic pressure. In Australia, the Wonthaggi desalination plant has four main stages. The first step is the intake area, where the intake area is safe in terms of the living environment. At the next stage, the water flows through a pre-filter where the solids are removed. And at the next step, the the reverse osmosis units pushes the pre-filtered water through an ultrafine membrane. And at the remineralization step, the resulting water meets the requirement of the Australian drinking water guidelines. Another very important technique is the forward osmosis. And the forward osmosis is a natural process like the reverse osmosis, and it uses a semi-permeable membrane to effect separation between the water and the dissolves. The forward osmosis plant operates at very low pressure, in addition, quietly adequate to circulate the fluids, and the natural osmotic pressure in the draw solution pulls the water through the membrane, and it leaves the solids and salt behind in the feed concentration, concentrated feed water. The first thermal process I'm going to talk about is the multi-stage flash distillation plant. This type of plant distills seawater by flashing a portion of water into steams in multiple stages, what are essentially countercurrent heat exchangers. The plant has a series of spaces called stages, and each stage has a heat exchanger and a condensator collector. The sequence has a hot and a cold end, while intermediate stages have intermediate temperatures, and each stage works with different pressure according to the boiling point of the water at the temperatures. The water can be collected at the bottom of the stages, and it's called a brine heater. The other important and widely used thermal desalination plant is the multiple effect distillation. This type of plant consists by multiple stages or effects, and each stage, in each stage, the feed water is heated by steam in tubes, and some of the water evaporates and this steam flows to the tube in the next stage, heating and evaporating more water. Each stage reuses the energy of the previous stage. The plant can be submerged by feed water, but more typically is that the feed water is sprayed to the top of bank of the horizontal tubes, and it drips tube to tube till it's been collected at the bottom of the stage. And very important, but not commercially, not in use in commercial method, is the freezing desalination plant. The freezing desalination plant uses the fact that the ice crystals are built up mainly pure water. The plant has consists three different discrete stages: the ice formation, the ice cleaning, and the ice melting. Compared it to other thermal processes, particularly the distillation processes, freezing desalination has a number of advantages. For example, it transfers less of energy, and it does not need pretreatment, and there exists minimal problem of scaling or corrosion problems. However, it's not so it have been rapidly developed in the last 50 years, but nowadays it forms a topic of studies and pilot plant units. To summarize the foregoing, 3% of the water amount on the Earth is fresh water, and only 1% is within human reach. According to the needs of the people, there have been developed several techniques for desalinate water, and the sources does not agree the distribution of the use of the techniques, but we can say that around 80% of world's water capacity is provided by multiple stage flash distillation technique and reverse osmosis. Today, developments in desalination technologies are specifically aimed at reducing energy consumption and cost, as well as minimizing environmental impacts. Low energy consumption reduces the plant carbon's footprint, and in addition, it can produce to lessen disruptions in marine life at the intake and outfall processes. However, in the last 2 decades, significant reduction appeared in energy consumption. The International Desalination Association's Energy Force Task has specifically challenged the desalination industry to reduce the energy consumption 20% more. Advancement includes such new and emerging technologies like forward osmosis promoted by magnetic materials, or using renewable energy like solar energy, wind energy, or geothermal energy. And over here comes the seawater greenhouse, low temperature distillation, and biomimetic and graphene membranes. According to the above mentioned facts, several studies have been published from the 60s for desalination water using magnetic field. In the 90s, other studies have been published to demonstrate and to promote forward osmosis by the help of magnetic nanoparticles. Several research groups presented results of using nanoparticles in different kind of desalination plants, and the results was that they accelerate the precipitation, or they cause changes in morphology of the precipitated calcium carbonate. More beneficial deductions can be taken based on Bayes and group and Zhao's and co-workers' publications, where the authors came to the conclusion that the polymer-coated magnetic nanoparticles can successfully absorb the salty ions from seawater. Bai says that the dextran is perfect for this proposed because it's a polymer what has good solubility in water and it has a variable molecule weight, and he used magnetite as nanoparticles because it has good magnetic properties. Here you can see how he imagined the dextran-coated magnetite. Another Zhao's result shows the draft of the cell for forward osmosis, and it says, and here you can see that the nanoparticles can be collected reversibly by an external magnet if the temperature of the solution exceeds the low critical solution temperature. The second figure contains the hysteresis loops of Bai's when he measured the magnetic properties of, in case A, the pure magnetite, B, the dextran-coated magnetite containing 64 weight percent of dextran, and C, 78 weight percent coated dextran-coated magnetite. And here you can see that all the samples are super paramagnetic ferrite. This figure shows the Fourier transform infrared, the spectra, and the A is the spectra of the pure dextran, B is the magnetite, and C is the dextran-coated magnetite, and it gives a clear evidence that the dextran can successfully synthesize on the surface of the magnetite. Here is Bai's group picture about a visible picture how you can collect particles by the help of a magnet. A Japanese group framed the desalination interface device between liquid chromatography and mass spectroscopy, and they used titanium dioxide coated microparticles. And why titanium dioxide? Because it can absorb specifically the non-volatile salts from the buffers, and they can be collected easily by the help of an external magnet. Here you can see the distribution of the synthesized microparticles, and after their results, they found that the smallest collectible particle size is 0.74 micrometer in diameter. The second figure is about the absorption amount of the absorption ability of the titanium coated microparticles, and the batch experiment says that almost all the phosphopeptides were absorbed to the microparticle surface, and the flow experiment says that if you increase the temperature, you can reduce the remaining particles in the solution. The other experiment shows the particle collecting experiments. They used 1 and 3 magnets respectively, and the microchannel height was 0.5 millimeter and 1 millimeter in height respectively, and more efficiently was if they used 3 magnets and the microchannel height was 0.5 millimeters. So what kind of beneficial attributes can give the new method? It requires only magnetic nano or microsite particles covered by a polymer. The synthesis of these particles are cheap. There are the evidence that the dextran-coated nanoparticles can absorb the cations successfully from the salty water, and the separation can be achieved by an external magnet, and the regeneration of the collected particles can be performed separately. It does not claim high pressure and does not claim high temperature, so it's cheap and economical, and very essential characteristic is that it's energy saving and environmentally friendly. So these results can be found in Lefteris Tataras thesis from 2012, And the author synthesized nanoparticles stabilized by oleic acid used through two different procedures. The first is the co-precipitation. You can see on the left the precursors and chemicals. And on the right, you can see the chemical procedure of the preparation. The nano size, the result was 20 nanometer in this case. Other possible route for preparation magnetite is the thermal decomposition. On the left, you can see the dwarfed cell and the representation of the nucleation and growth of the particles. The right, you can see the stabilized magnetite. Here, the secondary layer is oleic acid, and the right, it's stabilized by oleate. And in this case, the size of the particles was 8 nanometer. The synthesized nanoparticles have been characterized by the help of the listed non-destructive tests. And the X-ray spectra, it can be seen that the particles prepared by thermal decomposition are seems to be mainly machemite, and prepared by co-precipitation you can be found rich phase of magnetite. Why seems to be? Because the spectra has little difference, and it can be concluded only that there is machemite and magnetite, or the mixture of the both. The average sizes are 10 and 15 nanometers, calculated by Debye-Scherrer equation. And this result shows that for example, based on the transmission electron microscopy, the thermal decomposition caused a more uniform coat. And here you can see the various iron oxide after the DFT, divalent tetrahedral, trivalent tetrahedral, divalent octahedral, trivalent octahedral, and the spinel matrix. So the conclusions are that the prepared particles are mainly magnetite and machemite. Then the matrix depends of the preparation method, and the lattice is a cubic spinel. There are two different elimination peaks in the DTG results, and the most unstable molecules are the iron 2+. So based on these facts, we can say that the innovation lays on a feasible basis. So thank you for your attention.